Around 11 a.m. on February 20, 1917, officials and workers peering out the windows of City Hall in New York City faced a disconcerting prospect. 400 mothers were outside the building calling for food. The protest had begun that morning in Rutgers Square, where a crowd of at least 1,000 gathered, desperate to halt the perilous spikes in prices besetting the nation. The crowd moved through the Bowery toward City Hall. There, the New York Times reported a desperate scene. Tears were streaming down the faces of many. The babies in arms increased the uproar with their wails, and for a time, no one who attempted to address the throng could be heard. This food riot, as it came to be known, was not an isolated incident. At several places across the city that day, mothers overturned the carts of vendors. On a Saturday evening, a crowd of approximately 4,000 appeared at New York's Waldorf Astoria, refuge of the powerful and rich, demanding bread. In Philadelphia, police opened fire on a picket line of workers and protesters, killing 1 and wounding 9. The International News Service quoted a commodity broker from the wheat pit in Chicago about the supply of food hiding in plain sight. Thousands of railroad cars loaded with provisions are standing in the yards of eastern cities waiting to be unloaded. That is a fact. The food is there, and if it were destined for domestic owners, it would be unloaded. But it is not. It is all for the export trade. These events occurred a few weeks before the declaration of war, marking the official entrance of the United States into the titanic conflict of World War I. The nation was already deeply engaged, however, in the struggle to feed the hungry of Europe, as the modernized international system for trade began to disintegrate. World War I is noteworthy for fearsome technological advances in killing. Machine guns, long-range heavy artillery, aircraft, tanks, as well as the poison gases since considered too hideous even for war. However, as a war of attrition that pitched not only massive armies, but whole societies against one another, World War I is also the story of food, in which shortages led to protracted hunger and starvation, and victory was assured in large part by an unprecedented effort to produce and distribute food aid on a prodigious scale. This chapter examines the American home front effort to conserve food and bolster production across society as a key episode in the modernization and mobilization of American agrarian myth. When war planners faced cultural anxieties manifest in the food riots, as well as increasing demands for help from allies in Europe, they turned to the resonance of agrarian myth at the bottom of American memory. No longer emblematic of farmers alone, this myth would now form the core of a common identity for an increasingly urban society that was polyglot to an extent that the world had seldom known. In the crucible of a war in which food became a leading weapon, Americans recast agrarian myth not as a vestige of the past, but as the ultimate sign of American power to end the war and dispel the ancient enemy of starvation. A modern nation of farmers, democratic and virtuous, would supplant the old order, the moral bankruptcy of which was laid bare in the trenches. Through mobilization of land and people, approximately 28 million metric tons of food was shipped from the United States to allies in Europe during the war, including flour, grain, pork, beef, and sugar. Further, as Helen Zoe Veit notes, the experience of World War I clarified that world power in the new century would hinge on the ability to marshal and coordinate resources, both within and without national borders. Participation in programs at home to increase international aid to Europe was the most direct and meaningful way that most Americans experienced their country's rise to power.